Before jacking up the car, we're going to loosen up the lug nuts with a 21mm socket. Jack up the front of the car, and I'm adding jack stands. I've had vehicles fall over on me. Use a punch or something of the similar to de-stake the axle nut. If you don't de-stake this, you're going to chew up all the threads. You're going to have to replace your axle. Be very careful. Use a 30mm deep well socket and impact, if you have one, to remove the axle nut. Here I have a piece of wood up against the axle, and I'm just banging on it with the hammer just to loosen up the axle a little bit. Don't go crazy. You just want to see some movement. We're going to use a 17mm socket to remove the 2 bolts that are holding on the brake bracket. Here I'm just using some wire to hang the bracket up off on the spring or the coil, so it's not in my way. Here I'm removing the rotor. If your rotor doesn't come off, I think it is a M8 bolt, and you just tighten that in there, your rotor will pop right off. 4 bolts on the back, 1, 2, and 3, 4 on the other side. We're going to remove those. The 4 bolts will be a 17mm. Here I'm just removing the wheel sensor. It's a 10mm, and I'm just doing this to get it out of my way, and then I'll pull it up and out of there with a pair of pliers very carefully. Those 4 bolts I mentioned earlier, I'm just getting the ones on the other side now. They're at a kind of a weird angle. I just used a breaker bar to break them free and took them off. Now I'm just using a hammer to bang out the wheel bearing assembly. Just kind of tapping on this side, tapping on that side, and trying to get it apart. Here I'm just cleaning up the area before we put the new wheel bearing on. Put back on the brake shield and then put on the wheel bearing, and it's almost easier to leave the wheel bearing kind of free floating so that way you can line up the bolts, the 4 bolts that go in the back, and as you put those bolts in, it will pull it all in together. Be good to go. We're going to torque the back 4 bolts to 71 foot-pounds. Going to replace the wheel sensor. We're going to put back on the axle nut, and then we're going to torque it to 159 foot-pounds, but you'll have to use like a type of pry bar to wedge it in there so that way you can actually tighten it down without the wheels spinning. Here I'm just restaking the axle nut, basically putting that crease in there so it can't spin off. I'm just using a flathead screwdriver and pounding it down. Here I'm just putting on the rotor, and then I'm going to use a lug nut just to hold it in place while I put back on the brake bracket and get that bolted into place. Back at the bracket, we're going to torque to 79 foot-pounds.